What's up, people? Welcome to the John C. Guthrie Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please take a quick second to rate, review, and subscribe to the show on whichever platform you're using. It really helps the algorithms. You can find out more about me, the show, subscribe to the newsletter, or donate at JohnCGuthrie.com. That's JohnCGuthrieShow.com. Patreon.com/JohnCGuthrie, where is little for fuck. At patreon.com/JohnCGuthrie, for as little as $3 a month, you can help support the show and have my infinite, undying gratitude. You can find me on Twitter at JCarlGuth, and again, that's the letter J, CarlGuth. Send any questions or comments to me via email at JohnCGuthrieShow@gmail.com. Welcome back to the John C. Guthrie Show. What's up, people? This is episode 3, the pipeline hack, practical prepping, black swans, anti-fragility, resiliency, and the media. It's been a while since I put out an episode. It's been a few weeks. Sorry about that. Got wrapped up in some other stuff. I've got some ideas cooking. Going to have some changes coming down the pike. And I've got a couple other episodes in the works, but they're more research-based. One of them's super data heavy and just kind of keeps opening up and getting deeper and getting deeper. So I wanted to take a quick second and do a quick episode on some current events, the pipeline hack. So it is Tuesday, May 11th, 2:45 p.m. on the East Coast, and this pipeline was hacked, last night before last? So this is the Colonial Pipeline. It comes out of the Gulf of Mexico, and it carries something like 45 or 50% of petroleum products that are used on the East Coast. So it goes from the Gulf up to Greensboro, North Carolina, where it then branches out to points north in, I guess, a couple of different veins. It has slowed down supply in the Southeast to a major degree. So let's start there. Again, it's Tuesday the 11th, about 3 p.m. I'm visiting some family in the small town of Whiteville, North Carolina, in the eastern part of the state. So last night on the 10th, I was driving an hour to go see some friends. So I went ahead and I topped the car off, drove an hour, had dinner, came back, and I woke up this morning to see that nothing had changed and that there were reports of shortages. I'm about 3 hours from the house, so I went ahead and refilled my car so I could be sure to get back home. And at the gas station today, the lines were really long. People were starting to get a little froggy. It was pretty chaotic. There are probably 10 gas stations here in this town, and I think at maybe whatever it was, 10:30 in the morning, I saw 3 that were closed. I heard reports of like 1 or 2 that were open, and then I just had to go back out for something a minute ago, and again, I saw other stations that were closed. So there are a lot of stations that are out of gas at this point, and some are rationing. You've heard stories of that. And, prices are higher, lines are long, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so what's going on? So Colonial, the company that runs the pipeline, says that the line should be up by the end of the week, but nobody's really saying what that means, and so we'll pivot to a little discussion about the media here. So what we know is that a hacker collective called DarkSide took credit for this. And I saw an article today that the FBI has corroborated that. So this group, DarkSide, seems to be behind it. They describe themselves as being motivated by money. So, they say they're not political actors. They're not affiliated with any state. They're just in it for the dough. And, they have some funny statement on their website explaining their altruism. They only go after organizations that can afford it, this, that, and the other thing. all fine and dandy on paper until people can't get gasoline. There are some reports that there is a Russian connection, and from what I've been able to find, what that comes down to is this group has historically not targeted Russian firms. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they're, colluding with the Russian government. But personally, I wouldn't be surprised if they were inside of Russia or inside of, maybe a neighboring country, maybe a former Soviet Union country where if they were to target Russia, they would be easily swept up by the Russian security services. With that being said, would it surprise me if they had ties to Russian intelligence or something like that? No, of course not. There's a history of Israel doing things like this to adversarial countries. This is probably something that we do also. I don't know if anything on this level, on this scale, but wouldn't be surprised if this kind of thing was happening on a state level pretty commonly. Anyway, I don't think there's ever been an attack of this magnitude in the States. There have been plenty of times where there have been some large-scale ransomware attacks. Ransomware meaning these guys come in, they encrypt your data, they lock you out, and they won't release it until you pay them. So they've done this with hospital systems. They've done this with small, local municipality governments, that kind of thing. They've done it on some corporate targets. So basically, when they do this, you're just locked out of your own data. In this case, they managed to lock the pipeline company out of the functionality of the pipeline itself. I don't think this has ever happened before. Pretty wild stuff. So, so what's really going on? What does this mean? Again, Colonial said the line is coming back up by the end of the week, but I haven't seen any reporting actually analyzing that claim. So does this mean that they have paid the ransom? Does this mean that they are currently negotiating the ransom? Is this an aspirational plan? Hopefully, maybe, fingers crossed, we'll have things running by the end of the week. Or, is the ball rolling and it's a reasonable expectation to think that the pipeline is going to be back online by the end of the week? I haven't seen any of this stuff analyzed. What about this? Like, what if it doesn't come back online? I want to see this analyzed. I know that at the federal level, the Biden administration has waived the regulations that limit the amount of petroleum products that can be transported over the highway system. You've also seen some states do that, so that means they're sort of flexing up the truck capacity. But as you could imagine, that's going to pale in comparison to a pipeline running 24/7, which refills gigantic tanks across the southeast in this case, and then trucks are going to deliver fuel from those tanks to the various stations. I want to know, hey, what if the line doesn't come back on by the end of the week? When do the tanks get empty? When the tanks run out, what is the plan to have fuel transported over the roadway or by rail? What kind of reductions are we looking at? What's the plan for that? Do we go into some sort of rationing based on license plates like they did in the 70s? Or is it just going to be a free-for-all? Or do we not have that plan yet? So this is where another example of where the media, just drives me crazy. Just not doing the most basic part of their job. Again, this seems to be a scenario where the mainstream media is more concerned about pushing a narrative than providing information. There have been stories put out. The New York Times had a story up this morning that they, posted the caption on Twitter claiming that there were no shortages and that prices were not rising in the Southeast. Okay. Meanwhile, I am in a town where there are gas stations without gas, where the prices were up substantially. I don't remember exactly where they were prior. I think they were $2.40, $2.45 maybe, and they were $2.75 this morning. So that's a 15% gain or something along those lines. And in Asheville, North Carolina, I talked to a friend, and there was no gas to be found anywhere. People are calling gas stations and they're completely out. So it's just absolutely not true that there are no shortages and that prices aren't rising. It's complete nonsense. All of the articles are kind of saying the same thing. Here's what we know, and here's what Colonial is telling us. And I understand they don't want people to panic, but you're not in the business of shaping the reaction of the public if you're in the news business. If you're in the news business, your job is to provide information. The problem with pushing a narrative or supporting a narrative is sometimes that narrative isn't true. Right. And this has all sorts of knock-on effects. So if Colonial is saying that, hey, we think the line's going to be up by the end of the week, and then you just turn around and report that, if something happens and the gas isn't flowing at the end of the week, then you've shot your credibility even further down the tubes, and people are gonna they're gonna wonder, hey, why didn't you tell me that this was a possibility, and that way I could have helped plan for it. We saw this to the nth degree throughout the entire last year when it came to COVID, and any given data point around COVID, whether it was death rates, hospitalization rates, do masks work, do masks not work, are lockdowns effective, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When the media falls in line and decides that they're in the agenda business, they lose credibility, and people do not get the actual information that they need. So anyway, end rant. Final thing, it's totally understandable and okay if the media can't get these kinds of answers, right? I'm sure Colonial's not divulging every detail that they have. I'm sure whatever federal agencies are involved, Department of Energy, FEMA at this point, whatever, I'm sure they're keeping shit under wraps. But, come out and say, hey, this is what we're looking for. These are the questions we're asking. This is what we want to know. And this is the information that we have not yet been able to get. Instead of just writing an article saying, hey, everything's fine, don't worry about it. In a couple of days, everything will be back to normal. And the company assures us that that you don't have anything to worry about. Come on. It's nonsense, man. Get out of here with that bullshit. All right. It's the media component. So I wanted to segue a little bit into practical prepping. Prepping is one of my other interests. And it's a tricky thing. A lot of people get overwhelmed by the idea because, most people, they just go through day-to-day life and they assume that when they flip the switch, the lights will come on. When they turn the faucet, the water will flow. When they drive to the grocery store, there will be food on the shelves. So as long as that's your perspective, you don't even think about it, right? You just take it for granted that all these modern comforts have always been here, and therefore they will always be here. I would argue that's just normalcy bias and doesn't make any sense. And this particular scenario is a good opportunity to just remind yourself of what I would argue is the reality of our situation, and that is that we are at the whim of this incredibly complex society, and it can break, and sometimes it does break, usually on a small scale, but there's nothing carved in stone that says it can't happen on a larger scale. And again, we saw that with COVID. So, think about this. If this pipeline is not flowing in a few days, not only are gas stations going to be out of fuel, which is going to make it difficult for people to go to work. It's going to make it difficult for people to get to the store. It's going to make it difficult for people to potentially, get to a hospital if they need medical care, this kind of thing. But what happens when the trucks can't put diesel in the trucks anymore? What happens when the trucks stop running? When the trucks stop running, shit gets real interesting real fast. Everything that we touch and use in our society is brought to us by 18-wheelers. Everything in your grocery store gets there by truck. If the trucks can't get to the store, there's no food in the store. I'm not saying that's happening. I'm not saying that's something you need to worry about right now. But if you see something as ridiculous as some group of hackers can shut down the gasoline flow for half of the United States of America, that's a good time for you to pay attention and say, oh, you know what? This whole situation is actually a little more fragile than I thought. Down here in the South, especially in Eastern North Carolina, we have to deal with hurricanes. So it's, you can't really escape the idea of natural disasters. So that brings a certain level of preparation with it, unless you're just a complete mush brain. So that's good for us. And then COVID came. A lot of people went through the same stuff, right? You're seeing people buy guns for the first time. You're seeing people hoarding items from the grocery store. But you can look at what people were hoarding and see how mentally unprepared people were. If you think the world's ending and that equates to the need to buy more toilet paper, I would argue you've got bigger problems. So let's just talk about, why it's a good idea to be practically prepared and how you can do that, and just how necessary it is. So again, let's look at my region, but you can extrapolate it to your own pretty easily. So in Eastern North Carolina, we have a hurricane threat. Couple of years ago, my region was completely inundated with water and everything was shut down for a week. So no power. I think our water stayed on. Plenty of places lost water. You're not getting to the grocery store. You're not leaving your house. You're totally shut off from society for a week. Occasionally, we'll get like ice storms back in the western part of the state. You can get snowstorms. But if you live in a region that's frequented by tornadoes, you have that to worry about. If you're up in the Northeast, you've got snow and ice storms. Hurricane Sandy touched Manhattan, right? The wildfires touched Los Angeles. There really aren't many places in the United States where natural disasters should not be somewhat of a concern. And it doesn't mean you have to go overboard, which we'll get into. But so you've got natural disasters. This last year we had the freaking pandemic, which was total chaos, but it could have been a lot worse. So again, imagine if the pandemic had been worse and people decided that it was too risky for them to go to work. And you might be thinking, hey, people did decide that. We shut the economy down. I'm talking about everybody. I'm talking about the truck drivers. Imagine if the truck drivers decided, hey, I can't leave my family, or it's too risky for me to go be around people. I might bring it back to my family. Therefore, I'm not driving the truck. Imagine if that happens for, police, firefighters, EMTs. Imagine if it happens for hospital staff. Everybody has a point, right? These people aren't superheroes. There's nothing that guarantees they're going to put themselves and their families at risk for the benefit of you and me. There's a tipping point somewhere. Luckily, we did not get there with COVID, but there's nothing to say that we couldn't. Okay, so we have natural disasters. We have COVID in this case. And then now here's this crazy pipeline thing. This is all, obviously COVID and the pipeline were back to back, but then in Eastern North Carolina, Hurricane Florence was just a couple of years before that. So within a matter of a few years, you have three really major events in a stable, safe part of the country. We don't get hit as bad as like the Gulf with hurricanes traditionally. So our natural disaster risk is actually pretty moderate, and we're, of course, in the United States, the wealthiest, most powerful nation on planet Earth. So if that's what it's like here, imagine what it's like elsewhere. Point being, as humans, it's incumbent upon us to take our own safety and security into our own hands to a large degree. So how do you do that? How do you do that? Let's say you're starting at square zero. You're somebody who just, you don't think about it. Your meat comes in a package from from the grocery store. Lights are just magic devices that work with a switch. Water comes from faucets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what I would argue that you should do is just, work backwards, right? So without going down the rabbit hole too much, you have shelters first. So, that's your house, right? That's usually pretty squared away. If you live in an environment where it gets brutally cold, you have to have a source of heat or at least really solid sleeping bags. Basically you can die of hypothermia or heat exposure in a matter of hours. It's a lot harder if you're down in the deep south and you have to think about the power going out and AC and fans not working. That's why, we have to have giant shelters when hurricanes come and that kind of thing. That's a harder problem to solve, but that's not something that most people need to worry about. So generally shelter's pretty squared away because we have houses. So what comes after shelter? It's water, right? You can go about 3 days without water. After that, you're going to die. You need roughly 1 gallon of water per person per day. I like to keep, 2 to 3 weeks worth of water on hand. But I also have a well at my house and there are other sources of water that I could get my hands on and kind of clean or purify from there. The way I would urge you to think about all these things is, 1 week is an absolute bare minimum. 2 weeks is pretty good. But then, you really want to be able to stretch that a little bit further when it comes to like food, but we'll talk about that in a second. So, if you're by yourself, 7 gallons of water is going to get you through a week. That's, think about it. It's 7 milk jugs of water from the grocery store. That's not crazy. Throw them under your bed, leave them outside in a shed or something. The problem with water is that it takes up a lot of space. But you don't have to have 100 gallons. Just get a few days worth is better than nothing. But you want to have some water on hand. Food is going to be the next thing, obviously. You can go a week without eating pretty comfortably. I've never done it, but that's what they say. And you're not going to die for like 3 weeks. So, when you think about if you needed to ration food, it wouldn't take much to keep you not just alive, but like functional. I would urge you to have, at least several weeks worth of food. And that doesn't have to be anything crazy. You can just have the normal food that you eat supplied up so that you rotate through it and you always have some on hand. So you have a couple weeks if you need it. That's basically what I do. And then I have more emergency type food, stashed up for, somewhere between 30 and 60 days worth usually. I was usually in the 2, 3, 4 week range. And then when COVID was just starting to, be talked about, I flexed that up to about 2 months. Doesn't have to be crazy, y'all. Ramen noodles, jars of peanut butter, canned chicken, dry beans, rice, these kinds of things, right? So, it doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be super stressful. Have a few weeks of any kind of medication you need. I wear contacts, so I have to have extra contacts, and I like to have contact solution, toothpaste and vitamins. I'm lucky enough I'm not on any medication, but just the basic sort of toiletries, a little bit of water depending on what your scenario is. If you don't have outside access to fresh water that you can, even purify, I would say you want at least 2 weeks worth of water. If you can easily access some, maybe you don't need that much. Maybe just a week will be fine. 2 weeks worth of food, bare minimum, and preferably, get that up to a month or maybe even 2 months. It's not that expensive. It takes up a little space, but it doesn't have to be crazy. So anyway, I'd urge you to do that. Let this be a reminder, right? There's nothing that guarantees that our incredibly complicated society is going to keep functioning forever. Doesn't mean the world's ending, but it means, shit can go sideways for a couple of weeks and you want to be able to get through that okay. Okay, another little transition here. So let's talk about what this means on like a bigger societal level. I was recently listening to Black Swan by Nicholas Nassim Taleb, and the whole thesis of that book is the largest events for societies or corporations are these the most disruptive are these black swan events. So these are things that you can't readily foresee, right? So if a company sits down and they plan for all these different these different shocks that could happen to their business, they can foresee A, B, and C, and they have contingency plans in place for those. But the things that really get them are the events that they couldn't see coming, and it wasn't even reasonable for them to think about them. So completely understandable that you miss a black swan event. Read the book; it's long, it's complicated, but he talks about ways that you can mitigate that. So, I would argue that the pandemic, even though people were warning that this is something that could happen, this is a black swan event, right? This isn't just like a seasonal change in the economy. This isn't a cyclical disruption in the business cycle or something like that. This is a crazy exogenous event that most folks wouldn't be able to see coming. And then this pipeline thing is the same way. So, who had thought that one of our vulnerabilities would be that our pipelines are connected to the internet. Therefore, a bad actor with some technical know-how could shut off half of the country's gas supply. I knew that we were vulnerable to cyber attacks through, any number of different veins. But I had never personally thought about the gas pipeline. Never occurred to me. So this is, another one of these interesting black swan events. He followed Black Swan up, Taleb, with Anti-Fragility, which I have not read, but I've read a little bit about, and I'm familiar with the thesis. And it's basically something along these lines. You can't plan for black swan events. That's what makes them black swan events. So you can't mitigate something that you can't see. You can't solve a problem that you can't foresee. So what you want to do instead is build systems that are anti-fragile. So build systems that are inherently resilient. And that is something that we are really, really, really not good at. And do you see this changing on a social, societal, national level? I don't see it changing. Everything is just more centralized, more interconnected, and that just increases our level of fragility, right, as opposed to anti-fragility. So just be aware of that. Think about all of the possible ways that our incredibly complex, interwoven society can be disrupted. There's not a lot that we can do about that, right? But if you're at least aware of it, then it puts you in a good position where you can back into how you want to be prepared and how you want to make yourself more resilient, more anti-fragile. And this goes for you, your family, but if you have a business, right, be thinking about that. What happens if you can't do the online portion of your business anymore for some reason? Do you have a physical presence? What happens if you can't do the physical presence? Do you have an online presence? Obviously, again, the pandemic's a wonderful example. There were a lot of restaurants that just got caught and couldn't make a move, couldn't pivot. In this little town where I am, a guy who owns a little grill here, as soon as things shut down, he was renovating the front of his restaurant to build this outdoor patio area. And then right after that, he blasted a hole through the back wall and put in a drive-through, right? So he responded, he pivoted, and now he's super resilient from the standpoint of a restaurant. He's kind of doing all he can do. So in the event where society, politics, all of our institutions are failing at becoming more anti-fragile and more resilient, you got to realize that it's up to you. And if you didn't learn it through COVID, I don't know what would possibly wake you up. But take this pipeline thing, whether it's affecting you or not. If you're lucky enough to not be in the Southeast, there's nothing magical about where you live. These events could easily happen where you are. So just look at the reality of it and understand that there are things you can do, and it doesn't have to be crazy for you to be better prepared. Last thing I want to touch on is sort of the mental side of it. So a lot of people think that people who are any kind of prepper are like super paranoid, and they must be constantly terrified and always worried and super anxious. And it's a similar thing that you hear about people who carry guns or who own guns. It's like, oh, what are you afraid of? What are you worried about? And again, I think I touched on this with one of the things I was saying about guns in a previous episode. It's just a personality trait, right? Some people don't even think about it. Other people think about it, and so they want to be prepared. But it doesn't sort of disrupt their thought process or anything like that. But I can tell you from personal experience, being prepared makes you not anxious. It makes you calm. So think about the most afraid you were at the peak of the pandemic, and think about what you were worried about, and think about what you could have done to mitigate that anxiety. So as soon as things started getting hairy, I got water, I got more food. So again, I was already sort of slightly baseline prepped, and I flexed that up way before everything got crazy. So then as things got crazier and crazier and crazier, I didn't have to worry about that stuff, right? I was still worried about my family. I was still worried about my family getting sick. There's nothing I can really do about that. But the day-to-day, what's going to happen? Am I going to have, food, water, these kinds of things? I didn't have to worry about that. That lowers the anxiety. And then if you're ever in like a proper natural disaster, this stuff can actually be life and death, but also having that anxiety level lowered is going to help you make better decisions. It's going to help keep you calmer. It's going to help you just, be able to do the right thing and react in the right way. A lot of this stuff comes from my outdoor experience. So, if you're in the Alaskan wilderness and you have 10 people that it's your job to keep alive, you better make sure that you have backup systems for, your cooking, your cooking fuel. You better have 2 or 3 kinds of comms. If your sat phone goes down, you better have a radio that'll work, or a spot beacon to get the plane to come back, that kind of thing. Guys who've been in the military, similar experience. So if you don't have any of those backgrounds, I would argue that's a good reason to get involved in the outdoors, is just sort of strip away some of the, the vestiges of modern society and get a little closer to, living and see what you actually need. See how you handle those constraints and that stress and that kind of thing. And whatever, man, if you're not in a position to do that, at least try to think through it. But okay, that's about it, y'all. I just wanted to touch on this while it's happening. So again, we've got a pipeline that's down. The media is not telling us anything. Everything's going to be fine. And, I would argue that, we're going to be more and more vulnerable for these types of things going forward as things become more centralized and more interconnected. All right. Appreciate it, y'all. I will check you later. And again, next few episodes are going to be heavy with some research, and I got some cool stuff coming. All right. Thanks a lot, y'all. Cheers. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, please take a second to rate, review, and subscribe. If you enjoyed the show, please share it. You can find out more information on me, sign up for the newsletter, and donate at JohnCGuthrie.com. At patreon.com/JohnCGuthrie, you can sign up for recurring donations for as little as $3 a month. Follow me on Twitter at jcarlguth and send any questions and comments to JohnCGuthrieShow@gmail.com.